We now join CNN headline news, already in progress.
Some hardline Jewish settlers in the occupied territories vow to stay put. And it was a scary night for old Blue Eyes. Headline news, I'm Don Harrison. Damage control in high gear at the White House. Mr. Clinton returned from Camp David yesterday amid some strong Republican criticism of his handling of the Whitewater affair. The attacks follow revelations that White House staffers held meetings with Treasury Department officials investigating a failed savings and loan with ties to the Clintons. Top administration officials say they're fully cooperating with the investigation. Republicans are calling it another Watergate, saying the White House tried to conceal information.
And I think the longer the president denies the American people the facts, the more he's going to subject himself to this situation where members of his staff, either at his direction or on their own, get perilously close to obstructing justice. And let's not forget, in this very city, not too long ago, a president turned a third-rate burglary into a constitutional crisis.
Sometimes the handling of something can be infinitely worse than what it is that's being investigated. In this case, something that happened, alleged to have happened 10 years ago, and still no credible allegation of wrongdoing there, but the handling of it is, from this moment forward, going to be absolutely dead on and following the absolute highest ethical standards. You can be assured of it.
The special counsel investigating Whitewater has subpoenaed several White House staffers. Well, the White House is working hard to shift the national focus away from Whitewater and back to the president's health care reform plan. Archie Kelly has that story.
The president's men were trying hard to keep the debate on health care reform.
We're going to get back to work tomorrow on health care, on welfare reform and crime.
But health and welfare reform both took a back seat to that other Washington story, Whitewater.
Honestly, up in the Congress, we're working on health care and feeling pretty good.
Is Whitewater threatening to overshadow the president's agenda?
This latest hurdle for the Clinton health care agenda comes amid signs the plan is already in trouble. A new CNN Time magazine poll shows that for the first time, more Americans now oppose the plan than support it, 45% to 41%. But Vice President Gore says the growing attention to Whitewater does not change the focus in Congress.
Oh, I don't think it does. Again, I think there's a big difference between the way that controversy is viewed here in Washington and the way it's viewed out in the country.
But the view in Washington, even among key Democrats, is that final passage will involve major compromise.
I'm not so concerned that we're going to get the president's program intact. I think that what we've got to do by September or October is have a bill on the president's desk.
Republican opponents say they are willing to compromise on detail, but not on principle.
Number one, whatever we do, we got to pay for. We cannot wish away the cost.
Despite the current focus on Whitewater, the administration plans a new offensive to revive support for health care reform. The president, the first lady, and the entire cabinet will continue traveling around the country trying to convince individual Americans the Clinton plan is best not only for the country, but for them. Archie Kelly for CNN, Washington.
Mr. Clinton will be meeting with the leader of the former Soviet Republic of Georgia today at the White House. Edward Shevardnadze also plans to talk with congressional and business leaders. Georgia has suffered economic and military devastation since the demise of the Soviet Union. Shevardnadze is trying to drum up aid and investments for his country. The United States has already pledged $25 million in food assistance. The CIA has reportedly failed to buy back weapons it sold to Afghan rebels during the 1980s. The Washington Post reports Congress secretly authorized more than $65 million over the last 3 years to buy back 1,000 Stinger missiles. The paper says only a fraction have been recovered, and the whereabouts of most of the remaining missiles is unknown. The CIA fears the shoulder-fired weapons could be used by terrorists to shoot down civilian or military aircraft. Some of the missiles have reportedly turned up in Iran and North Korea. In Kazakhstan, voting underway in the former Soviet republic's first ever contested parliamentary elections. The country's economic crisis and relations between ethnic groups are major issues. But some observers are concerned that voter turnout may not reach the 50% level that's required to validate the election. After 2 years of war, Bosnia-Herzegovina may be a step closer to peace. United Nations officials say that Bosnian Croat and Muslim troops are abiding by a ceasefire accord. The deadline for both sides to remove their weapons from front lines in central and southern Bosnia or place them under UN control expired about 2 hours ago. Meanwhile, the UN Special Envoy Yasushi Akashi met with Serb and Muslim leaders near Sarajevo yesterday. On the agenda, a 4-week-old ceasefire in the Bosnian capital. Akashi also said progress was made towards reopening the Tuzla airport. Meanwhile, fighting continues in Maglai. Sarajevo radio reports at least 4 people were killed there overnight. In Gloucester, England, British police have found a 7th body in the basement of the so-called House of Horrors. The home's owner, Frederick West, is accused of murdering at least 3 of the victims, including his own daughter. He's scheduled to appear in court today. PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat urging the United Nations to pass a long-delayed resolution condemning the February 25th Hebron massacre. He's holding talks with Egyptian officials for a second straight day today. On that agenda, reviving the stalled autonomy talks with Israel. Arafat wants Israel to allow armed international peacekeepers into the occupied territories to protect Palestinians. So far, Israel's refused. Israeli officials announcing today that victims of the Hebron Mosque massacre or their families will receive up to $70,000 in compensation. Dozens of people were killed in the attack, the killings causing tension to surge between Jewish and Palestinian neighbors in Hebron. We have more from Paul Workman.
Hebron is the only Arab city in the West Bank with Jewish settlements right in the middle. For more than a week now, ever since the massacre, journalists have been barred from entering. These pictures were taken with a home video camera smuggled in. 40 families live in armed isolation here, drawn by a deep belief in God, a deep belief in Greater Israel, and determined now to resist anybody who tries to force them out.
The Jews came back to Hebron 14 years ago, and they will never leave Hebron again.
Hundreds of thousands of Arabs who, most of them hate me and don't want to see me here, so I'm always threatened.
Threatened first by Palestinians and now her own government. Israel says it will take 1,000 to 1,500 soldiers and millions of dollars to protect just 450 settlers in Hebron. For a growing number of cabinet ministers, it's not worth it.
This is an area of very close and sharp conflict, and the need to bring so many soldiers to guard them will enlarge and sharpen this area of conflict.
I think it's a very important struggle, and I'm ready for everything that's needed.
Settlers here still don't believe the government will dare to move them, knowing the risk of Jews fighting other Jews. One religious leader has already told settlers they should prepare to resist, even prepare to die. In the end, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin may have no choice but to remove the settlers from Hebron. The massacre has forced him into a corner, forced him to deal with the explosive issue of Jewish settlements long before he ever wanted to. Paul Workman, CBC News, Hebron.
Astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia receiving an all-American wake-up call this morning. The crew will spend much of today studying the physical effects of space travel. It says it doesn't expect a troubled fuel line to cut the mission short. High-pressure readings in that line have now returned to normal. In Indonesia, at least 30 people killed when a bus plunged into a river yesterday. A dozen people were injured. Witnesses say the driver of the bus lost control while racing another bus on a wet road. Police are searching for the driver who survived but fled the scene. An Alabama National Guard plane crashed in Georgia yesterday, killing the pilot. The reconnaissance plane went down in a rural county 60 miles southwest of Atlanta. The navigator did eject from the aircraft. He's hospitalized in stable condition, suffering minor injuries. The Air Force investigating that crash. The Board of Governors of the U.S. Postal Service begins 2 days of meetings this morning to consider a possible rate increase. The post office proposing to raise the price of a first-class stamp 3 cents to 32 cents.